Hello, welcome back to my fave fanfics. Here, I post, well, my favorite fanfictions, if that wasn't obvious. I do hope you'll enjoy them as much as I do. Please like and subscribe for more content. Without further ado, let's get started.
This is part 4 of What If Ichigo Lost His Zanpakuto in the World of One Piece. Credit goes to unseeded 4th. Chapter 11, The Plague. The afternoon had rapidly descended and the sun was following suit. Robin sat on a stool at the kitchen bench and admired the view from the window as Sanji lovingly sprouted a string of fond praises her way. "Would you like some coffee, Robin-chan?" he asked eventually. "That would be nice, thank you," she responded with a smile. "Right away, Tilda." As the cook busied himself in preparing the coffee, Robin took the time to admire the view from the other window. The cove was peaceful and quaint. The ground by the shore was grassy and dotted with oak trees as it sloped upwards into a rolling hill, from which a constricted winding trail descended. She followed what she could of the trail with her eyes, before distinctly making out a few different blurs of color amongst the trees. Though when she looked closer, the colors became undoubtedly human figures. "Someone's coming," she observed. Sanji looked over and surveyed a small party of people, figures obscured by the trees as they walked along the narrow path and toward the cove. "Weird," he muttered, "from what Xiaomin told us, people don't usually come here, maybe they're just passing through." "Perhaps we should make sure of that," Robin suggested. She stood and prepared to make her way onto deck, when Nami burst into the room closely followed by Zoro. "Nami-san, Tilda?" Sanji happily sighed, before reverting to an irritated demeanor, and the idiot Marimo. The pair ignored him. "It's Quillam," Nami relayed, "we overheard him in town. He was talking to Gao Chao, they're planning to frame us for assassination." Quote. "What?" Sanji questioned as they hurried out onto deck. By now, the group of people, 5, to be precise, had followed the entirety of the path down to the shore and were currently gathering around the Sunny's expanse. "Who are you?" Frankie asked them. The nearest figure chuckled before removing his deep emerald hood. "It's him." Brook stammered, "the man who had Nami-san and I captured." Quote. "Indeed, Skeleton," the man responded, "I am glad you can recall me. Though even though you escaped the dungeons, I knew you were yet to escape the island." "How did you know where we were?" Sanji demanded. "Relax," Quillam soothed, "I am very resourceful. That is all." "How did he get here so fast?" Zoro questioned. After all, he and Nami had raced back whilst Quillam had still been conversing with his accomplice. "I have my ways. After all, having you take refuge in this particular cove was all part of our plan. We were told to come here so that you wouldn't bother us," Sanji sneered. "But didn't I tell you to be careful in whom you trusted?" Quote. "You didn't tell us that." Sanji retorted, "The one who told us that, was. Sanji paused for a moment. "Xiaomin's working with you." Quote. "Close, but not quite," Quillam commended. "Then how did you know?" Chopper questioned. Quillam sat down on the ground and crossed his legs, withdrawing a miniature puppet theater from somewhere in his robes. "What's that for?" Quote. "You'll see," Quillam responded simply. Sanji grit his teeth as the man continued to fiddle with the small theater. "What the hell kind of puppeteer are you anyway?" he questioned. "You work for a corrupt right-hand man and prevent anyone who knows the truth from leaving your sight. What do you gain from that?" Quote. "I think you will find I'm more than just your average puppeteer," Quillam said. "The puppets I use are, how should I put this, very lifelike." "I wonder what they're talking about," Usopp mused as he and Luffy continued to watch Ichigo and Smoker converse. "I can't hear," said Luffy. "Maybe we should move a bit closer." Here's some good disguises. Quote. The two young men grabbed for a pair of frivolous pot plants and slowly began advancing from behind them out of the alleyway. However, they hadn't gone far when a sudden interruption halted them in their proceedings. Hey, you two, a rough voice sounded from behind them. Luffy and Usopp wheeled around to see a guard dressed in an even more elaborate uniform than they were, indicating he was of higher status than those that wore the standard guard uniform. Eep, Usopp hid behind Luffy. The guard rolled his eyes and muttered something along the lines of, the people he employ these days, before speaking again. Quit goofing off, he said, the closing ceremony begins in an hour, now get over to the palace. Is it dinner time? Luffy questioned. The higher-up rolled his eyes. Just get back to your posts, or else. Luffy and Usopp obediently scrambled in the direction of the palace, Luffy tripping on the hem of the too long tunic as they went. The cove was silent, save only for the wooden tinkering as Quillum continued to toy with the tiny puppet theater. What do you mean by that? Nami asked perplexedly. You see, I ate an interesting fruit, Quillum said, seemingly content with his pint-sized theater and standing to his feet. The puppet fruit, I think it was, in other words, I can create up to 3 extra bodies and use and control them as I want, simultaneously and as though they were separate entities. Scary, Brook shuddered. Observe, Quillum ordered. The gathered Straw Hats looked on in grotesque curiosity as a pale green light formed around Quillum, before it shifted to his left in the form of another entity, which slowly got to its feet. You, Sanji observed with a glare. I thought it was a little too friendly of you to go so far out of the way to help us when you knew the risks, Xiaomin-san, Robin said with a small smile. Xiaomin the entertainer stood before them as they'd seen him the previous night. But it seems you weren't careful enough, he said, by doing as I said and coming to this cove, you've played right into our trap. A light appeared around Quillum again and he shifted into Xiaomin's body. Understand now? The entertainer questioned, before the form of Quillum shifted out once again. The two of us are one and the same, both bodies said at once. Creepy. Both Chopper and Brook commented. Though I don't believe either of them are the original body, Robin noted. Then, do you think the original is? Nami questioned. You women are smart ones, Xiaomin commented with a smile, though I'm afraid that even with all your intellect, you won't be able to halt my years of planning. You've been planning this for years? Frankie questioned. I, as a man by the name of Gao Chao, set everything up from the start, Quillum said with a smirk, even before that plague was unleashed all those years ago. Luffy and Usopp awkwardly maneuvered their way toward Shangpio's Grand Palace. Isn't this exciting? Luffy stated as he adjusted his straw hat atop the wild afro, only for tumble to its former position around his shoulders when a small breath of wind blew past. But what if we're found out? Usopp questioned. That's okay, we can take this as an opportunity to practice our ninja skills, Luffy suggested, we can be discreet and inconspicuous. We'll sneak into the palace as guards and then we'll see if we can find suspicious things, like food. That's right, Usopp said, realizing the benefits of their situation, we're at an advantage. If they're expecting any sort of intruders, they'll expect them to be stealthy and use secret entrances. But we'll be going straight through the entrance, no one will suspect a pair of guards. Quote. The two subconsciously fastened their pace. I wonder what food they have at the palace, Luffy pondered, I bet it's good. I'm so excited. Quote. They rounded a corner and reached an intricately decorated tunnel that led to Shangpio's impressive palace. Neither of the two had been in the vicinity of the palace yet, though they'd seen the tremendous construction from the square and when enjoying the festivities. However, simply seeing the structure in the background or distance could not prepare them for the splendor the structure had up close. Gold encrusted the edges of the building, richly contrasting the fine red maple that made up much of the exterior structure. The slanting roofs were glowing with a shining finish, and everything about the place suggested extensive wealth. It looks just like the one on the hat, Usopp commented, recalling his winnings from the previous day. The two continued into a tunnel towards the palace's main entrance. It echoes in here, Usopp noted. Ooh. I want to test it, Luffy said excitedly, before yelling into the tunnel, Usopp's an idiot. Quote. Sure enough, several softer Usopp's an idiot sounded as they bounced off the walls all throughout the tunnel. Shishishi, they all think you're an idiot, Usopp, Luffy said, grinning at his friend. Before Usopp could respond, however, another chorus of echoes bounced back from the opposite side of the tunnel. Charlie's an idiot, the chorus of voices maintained. Charlie? The sniper questioned, that doesn't sound like my name. It must be your brother, Luffy realized, slamming his fist into the palm of his hand. I don't have a brother. As they traversed the tunnel, they noticed two boys in all too familiar uniforms, who were chattering amongst themselves. Marines? Usopp questioned, they must be with Smoker, but what are they doing here? Quote. Maybe they're on a holiday, Luffy suggested. Oh, some guards, the smaller one said, noticing them. Can you help us with directions? Asked the other. But you're Marines, Luffy resented. So what? The taller one asked, you're guards, you should be able to tell us which way to go. Yeah, we're guards, remember? Usopp prompted. Yosh, Luffy nodded, what do you need help with? Quote. We want to know where the huge slide is, one of them said. Sure, said Luffy as he turned and pointed up the street. You go up there and then turn when you think you can smell meat, because it's right across from a meat shop. Or you could just look for a giant slide, it's not that hard to miss, suggested Usopp. Thanks, the two said, saluting two different ways. Don't mention it, you Marines, Luffy bade them as he and Usopp continued towards the palace. However, a sudden gust of wind sieged the tunnel, fumbling at the guard robes and upsetting the afro on Luffy's head. One of the Marine's eyes widened as he pointed a menacing finger at the well-renowned pirate. It's him. It's Idiot One. Quote. Yeah. What should we do, Idiot 2? Quote. You're Idiot 2. I'm Idiot 3. Nah, I am. Quote. As if. Rear Admiral Smoker pointed at me when he said Idiot 3. You weren't paying attention. And he told us to call him Smoker-san, remember? Besides, I'm younger so I should be Idiot 3. Quote. Well, I'm older and more responsible so I should make the decision, and I decide I'm Idiot 3 and you're Idiot 2. Quote. Luffy tilted his head, is this some sort of mystery marine game? Quote. What's mysterious about it? Usopp questioned flatly as the two continued to bicker. Luffy shrugged. Let's go. Without further ado, the two pirates jogged the rest of the way to the grand entrance of the palace. Ellipsis. It's huge, Luffy observed once they finally reached the front entrance to the palace. The plaza is just over there, Usopp noted, indicating toward the palace's left. That's where the closing ceremony will be. Sure enough, the plaza was decked out in all sorts of Shang finery, ranging from trusses of elegant flower to a splendid array of materials. Let's go in, Luffy said. The two were admitted entrance by another pair of guards and merely waltzed into the large entrance hall, which was decorated with many different illustrations and symbols which neither knew the meanings for. Meanwhile, the guard at the entrance nudged his friend. Since when has one of us had an afro? Quote. His friend shrugged. Okay, Usopp said, remember, be inconspicuous. And look for anything suspicious. Right, Luffy said with a nod, inconspicuous and suspicious, inconspicuous and suspicious, synconspicuous and impicious. Look for any sign of that Gao Chow guy. Yosh, Luffy said as the two of them wandered further into the palace. Look, said Usopp after a moment, pointing to a portrait on the wall. It's a painting of him. Quote. Very suspicious, Luffy observed, stroking his chin. Wait here, Luffy, Usopp said, I'm going to get Ichigo. Yosh, Luffy nodded as his friend left. He stood in silence across from Gao Chao's portrait for a full 90 seconds, before a heavenly scent distracted him from his task. Luffy muttered to himself as he slowly began trailing after the scent. That smells nice. His keen nostrils lead him up through the palace's twisting corridors and in and out of various bathrooms. He ascended a deep mahogany staircase, which led him to a well-lit room which, to his delight, was the source of the delicious smell. Without a second glance, he discarded the afro and launched himself into the banquet, his rubber arms first reaching for a slab of steak, which he hungrily tore into. Such an appetite. A rich voice came from behind him. I thought a feast might attract you. MMH? Luffy slowly turned to see a tall, lean man enter the room and steadily close the door. Enjoying the food, Straw Hat Luffy? Quote. Luffy swallowed the rest of the steak in a single gulp. You're the Osan from the poster, Usopp, and I laughed at Ichigo for winning. The man laughed. Yes, they do seem to feature me on a lot of merchandise, don't they? So foolish of them. Luffy returned his attention to the meat. So foolish of them, I said, Gao Chao repeated. Yeah, they're pretty big idiots, Luffy nodded, stretching an arm across the table to grab a lobster. Wait, who are we talking about? Funny poster Osan. Quote. Gao Chao suppressed a sigh. I was talking about the civilians of this island. Luffy shrugged and devoured the lobster, immediately grabbing for an entire chicken. So thoughtful of you to have a banquet, funny poster Osan. Man, I'm hungry, ha ha ha. You realize the feast was just to lure you in, right? Quote. Gao Chao got nothing by the pirate captain's munching, followed by silence in response. I can understand you eating, just don't fall asleep as well. The advisor snapped. Luffy jerked back to life, having just been hit by a silver platter. Sorry, he said and continued eating. Gee, I knew he was dense, but this, Gao Chao muttered to himself as he observed the boy use his stretching abilities to feed himself from the various dishes. Alright kid, at least listen while you eat. You can do that, right? Quote. Yosh, Luffy responded, seating himself on the table. As Luffy busied himself with the food, Gao Chao continued. You might recall a certain conversation you had last night with me and about me, he said, everything I told you as Xiaomin the entertainer is true. What? Luffy questioned, the Kanga boat Osan is you? I thought he was our friend. Well, I guess you kind of do look like each other a bit, but I think my guard disguise is better. Yes, it is me, but we don't look anything like each other. That's the point of my puppet fruit, you fool. UGHG, anyway. As I was saying, Shangpyo is merely my territory where I can do whatever I feel, hence I established my bounty hunting business. Otherwise, I too have a superior above me. Though his goals do not concern you or your crew, thus I can capture you for my own and hand you into the Marines. You'll have to get them off that giant slide first, Luffy munched. Gao Chao ignored him and continued. And after tonight, by my hands this island will be completely controlled, as by my hands it succumbed to the plague all those years ago. Luffy's eyes narrowed. The plague? Quote. Nami frowned as the pair continued their explanation, or rather as Gao Chao continued his explanation through the two puppets. But to gain control over Shangpyo, I needed to be in a position of power. And to be in a position of power, I needed the favor of the people. And to gain the favor of the people, a situation needed to arise in which I could triumph the hardships those people were suffering. Do you see where this is going? Quote. Luffy sat cross-legged atop the table and slowly munched on a leg of turkey and intently listened as Gao Chao fondly reminisced. I would fantasize disease and famine to reign over Shangpaio, so that I might ride in as an unknown hero and be the savior of the land, thus gaining all that I wished. So imagine my disdain when nothing of such would come to pass. Eventually, I decided that if no disaster or disease would befall Shangpaio, I just have to make one. Quote. MMMPH Luffy questioned, roughly translating to, make one? Through a full slab of steak and half a dozen bread rolls. Indeed, Gao Chao inclined his head. I traveled to a foreign land to obtain it, but it was I who inflicted that plague on these people. In one gargantuan gulp, Luffy swallowed the mouthful he'd been chewing on and watched the man with a piercing gaze. You're the reason all the people were getting sick? Quote. Of course I could have cured the disease at any point, Xiaomin continued. After all, I'd had the cure before I'd even unleashed the plague, and I'd already administered it to myself. But in order for my plan to be truly effective, the people needed to suffer. The crops needed to suffer, the island's livelihood needed to suffer. Only when it seemed as though there was no hope left would my plan be at its most effective. So I waited. The gathered straw hats regarded the men with a mix of resentment and disgust. Though none more so than the little reindeer. A doctor isn't meant to do things like that. Chopper furiously stated. Chopper-kun. Brook looked over to the young doctor, who continued to voice his protest. Doctors are meant to save lives, not go out of their ways to make people sick for their own benefit. Quote. But I did give them the cure, Quillam pointed out. That's not the point. You're the one who caused them to suffer in the first place. You tricked these people and now you're using them. Even if you cured their bodies afterwards, you've corrupted their minds with worse things. Quote. Xiaomin raised an eyebrow, is that so? Quote. That's why, whatever you're planning, we're going to stop you. You've used the people of this island for too long. Quote. If you were planning to stop us, you should have thought of that sooner, Xiaomin chuckled. Soon your captain will be framed for the emperor's assassination and the lot of you will be handed over to the world government. And then I shall gain complete control of this island. Not if we stop you, Zoro said, preparing to withdraw his katanas and fight. We have to warn the others about this somehow, Sanji said. Leave that to me, said Nami. Swiftly, the navigator hurried below deck, where she fetched the waiver and exited through the docking system. I'll have you know that your hungry idiot captain is hearing of this as we speak, Quillam said. Though regardless of whether you send that or not, it won't make any difference in the outcome of things. The other two at the palace will fall right into my trap, as your captain already has. Is that so? Zoro questioned as he withdrew his katanas, the remainder of the crew advancing with him. I hate to tell you this, but you've made a vital mistake in this plan of yours. Oh? Xiaomin questioned. Yeah. Being arrogant enough to underestimate us. Yeah? Merlin snapped. Well, I like Amano's characters better. Quote. That's subjective. Charlie responded. Kishimoto's story has been going for longer. Quote. That's because it started like 5 years earlier, you moron. Charlie and Merlin, now arguing about a completely different matter, had yet to realize the pirates had done a runner. And tell. Hua? Where did they go? Quote. The two quickly glanced up and down the tunnel. Gya. We let them escape. Quote. We have to tell Rear Admiral Smoker-san that we saw them though, we just won't say that we talked to them or had the chance to capture them or anything. Yeah, or he'd demote us for sure. Quote. But I still like Amano's work better. Shut up. Quote. Ichigo continued to listen in interest as Smoker told him of some of the places he'd visited prior to arriving in Shangpaio. The story was getting quite exciting when hurried footsteps alerted them to a pair of boys whom appeared to be slightly younger than Ichigo, who guessed them to be the idiotic accomplices Smoker had mentioned earlier. It's him. One stammered. Idiot one. Said the other, he's on the way to the palace. Quote. So he is on this island, Smoker observed, thanks for letting me know. As the two boys excitedly mulled over the praise, Smoker turned back to Ichigo. "Sorry to cut this short," he said, "but duty calls. Don't mention it. I hope you find that guy you're looking for." Ichigo called after him with a wave as his new friend quickly departed. "Now, what was I meant to be doing again?" Quote. He mused and pondered as crowds of people continued to pass. "That's right, I was looking for that guy, but where did he go?" Ichigo proceeded to wander aimlessly through the swarms of people, dodging to move out of the way of those towing carts of goods bought from the markets. It wasn't long before a familiar figure came into view. "Ichigo." Usopp called, having noticed Ichigo at the same time and waving over to him. "What's up?" Ichigo asked as he approached. "Luffy and I managed to get into the palace," Usopp told him. "Oh dear," Ichigo muttered, "is the security at the palace really that bad?" Quote. "Nope. We just have awesome disguises. But you need to come to the palace," he said. Ichigo raised an eyebrow. "And how do you plan on smuggling in?" "I don't have the same disguise you guys have. That's why I bought these," Usopp said smartly as he held up a set of handcuffs. "I'm dressed as a guard. We'll just pretend I'm arresting you." "Are you sure there's not any other way?" Ichigo questioned. "They only let guards and prisoners in. There are some dungeons in there somewhere, I think. And what's so special about the palace?" Quote. "Luffy and I think we might be able to find that Quillam guy or someone else suspicious there," Usopp responded. "We might need you. The only way we can get you in is if I arrest you, so just play along." "Okay?" Quote. "It's all right," Usopp said. "I have the keys and I'll unlock you once we're there." Ichigo grudgingly held his hands behind his back as Usopp secured the handcuffs and led him in the direction of the palace. "At least you're not Luffy, I guess," Ichigo mused, "but if that were the case, I wouldn't trust him with a set of keys in the first place." "So what are you planning?" Luffy asked. "The Emperor will be assassinated," Gao Chao said confidently. "You will be blamed and I will collect the bounties of your entire crew." Luffy remained silent. "And as for the young substitute Shinigami that travels with you?" Luffy's eyes widened. "How do you know about Ichigo?" Quote. Gao Chao's mouth twisted into a grin. "My master has better uses for him than the world government ever will." Luffy frowned. "Your master?" "Yes," said Gao Chao. "I mentioned I had one outside of Shangpyo." "Is your master the guy who took the Zangetsu?" Luffy demanded. "So what if he is?" Gao Chao questioned with a shrug. "Master Shearwater has his goals and I have mine. This time, however, it seems our goals are overlapping and this is an opportunity I don't want to miss." Ichigo followed Usopp down through the tunnel and toward the palace. "Oi," Usopp questioned after a moment. "Why were you talking to Smoker before?" Quote. Ichigo questioned. "Smoker? You know him?" Quote. "Of course we know him." Usopp snapped. "Are you friends?" Quote. Not really. He's the guy who's been chasing us all over the Grand Line." "Oh," Ichigo said slowly. "Yeah, he did mention how he was chasing some idiot." "Wait, you mean that guy the first was talking to is your enemy?" Quote. "That idiot would be Luffy. And yeah, Smoker's a Marine who keeps chasing us, so I guess he's our enemy." "Didn't you notice the Marine uniform he was wearing?" Quote. "Nope." Before Usopp could respond further, they reached the palace entrance where they were halted by the pair of guards from earlier. "I have a prisoner," Usopp relayed to them. "It's best he stays here during the closing ceremony." "What did he do?" one of the guards asked. "He was running boisterously through the central plaza," Usopp explained to them. "Meh, good enough," Ichigo thought. "Naked." In front of the children, Usopp found it necessary to add, "And it was I, the great Captainus, guard who halted this vile offender in his exploits." One of the guards raised an eyebrow. "Is that so, Sonny?" He questioned Ichigo. The substitute Shinigami grimaced. Usopp lightly nudged him and he subtly stepped on the sniper's foot before responding. Yes. Yes, it is. The guard tutted and shook his head. Young ones these days think they can make a statement by running wild and bare. Very well, the other guard said, in you go. The two guards cleared the way and Usopp led Ichigo into the building. Once these come off, you are so dead, Ichigo murmured to him through grit teeth as they passed through the expansive entrance hall. Usopp only snickered to himself in response. However, upon arriving in the grand entrance hall, the doors slammed firmly shut behind them. Usopp looked around. Was that meant to happen? Ichigo asked him. From up in the entrance halls overlooking balconies, numerous guards stood ready and armed. Hello everyone, Usopp greeted. I was just showing this prisoner to the dungeons. He quickly led Ichigo in the direction he had earlier gone with Luffy, when another guard blocked the path. You won't get to the dungeons this way, the guard said. Oh, of course. Usopp said, wrong way. Sorry, I'm still new. The guard advanced a step. In fact, you won't find any dungeons here. They're on the other side of town. Prisoners aren't taken into the palace. Drat, Usopp muttered, they saw through us. Ichigo groaned, cursing the dumb situation. Nice try, the guard commended, but really, you were pretty obvious. We have a firm record of all the guards here at the palace, and all of us know each other by name. Also, none of us have an afro, added another. Speaking of which, where's Luffy? Usopp pondered. I'm sure he's fine, Ichigo commented flatly. Knowing him, he's probably found a room full of food or something. What we need to worry about now is ourselves. Got any more brilliant plans? Quote. Usopp grinned. Yes, I do. The sniper donned his goggles and the palace guards prepared themselves. Quicker than lightning, Usopp reached into his shrapnel bag, grabbed his sling and shot 3 small distinctive projectiles which created some sort of smokescreen. He then grabbed Ichigo by the arm. Run. Quote. This is your great plan? Ichigo questioned skeptically as angry voices shouted after them from behind. Usopp led them up the hallway and quickly shoved himself and Ichigo into a nearby room. Shish, he breathed as the sound of several footsteps passed them. When they're gone, we can find Luffy. Once the echoes of the footsteps had died, Ichigo hefted a sigh. Can you undo these cuffs now? They're starting to get annoying. Right away. Quote. However, as Usopp began tinkering with the lock, a sudden gushing of water swiftly followed by the slamming open of a door sounded, causing the sharpshooter to jump and pause what he was doing. An oblivious palace worker emerged from one of the cubicles, having just relieved himself. He crossed the room and proceeded to wash his hands in the elaborate banister, from where he regarded Ichigo and Usopp's reflections in the mirror. In return, the two smiled at him awkwardly and waited for him to leave. All right, Ichigo sighed once the bathroom door firmly shut behind the man. He's gone. Get this damn thing off already. Quote. Ichigo-kun, Usopp's voice suppressed panic. Ichigo's eye twitched at the honorific. What? Quote. About the keys? Ichigo looked down, only to realize they'd been standing atop a drain. Don't tell me. I dropped them when that guy came out of the cubicle. Ichigo facepalmed. At least, he would have if he could. I told you not to tell me, he groaned. You see now, Straw Hat Luffy? In only a few moments, the closing ceremony will begin. You will be framed for the Emperor's death and subsequently captured by my soldiers and handed to the world government. Ichigo Kurosaki will be handed over to Master Shearwater and I will reap the benefits of all situations. Is that clear to you? Quote. Luffy swallowed one last mouthful of meat before getting to his feet. Well, one thing's for sure, he said as he cracked his knuckles, when I find that Shearwater guy, I'm gonna kick his ass. But first it looks like I'm gonna have to kick yours. Chapter 12, The Turning of a Dynasty. The situation was one of the stupidest he'd been landed in, and he couldn't even facepalm. So Ichigo did the next best thing and resorted to simply letting loose a short, brief exhale as Usopp blabbered a series of both ludicrous and slightly plausible suggestions as to how he could free himself from the problematic handcuffs. Why not try one of those keto things? The sharpshooter suggested, have it blow up, like you always do. It might break the cuffs. Quote. What are you implying? Ichigo responded dejectedly, I don't always make them explode. Quote. Whenever you show us, you do. That's why Luffy's impersonation of you was so accurate. Quote. The urge to facepalm grew so strong, there was no way a simple stifled sigh would suffice. Instead, Ichigo opted to facewall. However, upon making contact with the stone wall, Ichigo found it wasn't quite as stable as he'd originally thought. The wall wasn't actually made of stone, but rather plaster that had been given the texture of stone. As such, instead of experiencing the satisfying thunk a true stone wall would have offered him, Ichigo endured a rather unsatisfactory smash and tumble through what could have appeared to be an eggshell-like surface. Great, he groaned, awkwardly getting to his feet without the aid of his hands. Standing up, he saw that they were no longer alone. A set of guards sat opposite the recently destroyed wall, their game of dice lying forgotten as both looked on in wide-eyed wonder at the spectacle that had just beheld them. Hi, Ichigo said, attempting to wave but realizing he couldn't do that either. I was just looking for the bathroom. We were in the bathroom already, idiot, Usopp hissed over to him. There they are. One of the guards exclaimed loudly enough to alert his colleagues, we've found the intruders. Quote. Cursing, Ichigo drew himself back into the room. What do we do now? He questioned Usopp as the sound of many pairs of feet rumbled from somewhere nearby. What did you do that for? Usopp complained, now they know where we are. It's not like I knew the wall was plaster, Ichigo retaliated as the two quickly scurried through the demolished wall and raced up the hallway, away from the sound of the multitude of feet. If anything, it's your fault for dropping the key in the first place. Luffy prepared his stance and surveyed Gao Chao carefully, the remainder of the food on the table lying forgotten. The puppet master raised an eyebrow and surveyed the Straw Hat Captain in return. You'll kick my ass? He questioned, is that so? Quote. Damn straight, Luffy replied, waiting to see if his opponent would go ahead and make the first move. Instead, Gao Chao only stood there, smug relaxation reflected in his gaze. I'm sorry, Straw Hat, he said, but fighting me isn't going to do anything. As soon as you set foot onto Shangpio's turf, your fate, your crew's fate, Ichigo Kurisaki's fate was sealed. Not if I can help it, Luffy said, choosing to strike first. In a fluid movement, he fired a clenched fist at the Emperor's advisor. However, Gao Chao nimbly evaded the strike, allowing Luffy's fist to penetrate the wall behind him. Gao Chao tutted mockingly, did you not listen to a word I said, Straw Hat? It's useless. But didn't you listen to a word I said? Luffy said in return, I'll kick your ass. Gao Chao's eyes narrowed as Luffy reeled his rubbery arm back in and prepared to strike again. You know, he said to the pirate, if you pay too much attention to trying to attack me, you won't notice what's going on out there. Luffy turned his eyes to a nearby window, from where he could see crowds of people flocking into the palace grounds for the closing ceremony display. There's a lot of people, he remarked. Of course there is. And in about 10 minutes, Gao Chao glanced over to an elaborate clock on the wall by the door, shoot. Make that 5 minutes, only 5 minutes until the ceremony starts. Drat. You've been distracting me. How foolish of me, to fall for this witty stalling trap of yours. Quote. said Luffy as he subconsciously let his finger explore the insides of his nose. I think you were the one who was doing all the talking. You're a bit of an idiot, ha ha ha. Quote. Curse you, Straw Hat, I'm going to be late. What will the civilians think of me if I don't show up for this? My reputation will be in tatters. Quote. Without any warning, Gao Chao advanced on Luffy faster than anticipated. Luffy stealthily managed to evade the brunt of the blow, but was caught off guard when the advisor's two forefingers struck him at the base of the neck. Now if you'll excuse me, Straw Hat, Gao Chao said as he quickly straightened up, I have a closing ceremony to attend. With a sudden gust, Gao Chao disappeared and Luffy was left sitting in the room alone, dumbly rubbing where Gao Chao had hit him. He really is an idiot, Luffy decided, But where'd he go? Quote. The wind whipped at Nami's lengthy tangerine hair and sea spray fizzed upwards from either side of the rocketing waver. Her features contorted into a scowl as she rounded the island's coast and the festive city came into view. Surely it wouldn't be much longer until the closing ceremony, she had to work fast. Eyeing the port as it came nearer, she took note of the narrow channel veering off into the port of the palace. I'll start there, she thought to herself. Steering the waver into the channel, she pressed her foot down on the throttle in order to gain the extra speed she needed. Once she reached one of the docks, she parked the waver and jumped off, running towards one of the entrances to the palace. Vague drums sounded from not all that far off, signaling the commencement of the closing ceremony. Damn it, she muttered, maybe I'll just head over to the ceremony grounds. With any luck, those three idiots will be over there as well. A sound from above alerted her to another presence close by. She looked up in time to see none other than her captain crashing out of one of the palace windows. Luffy? She questioned. Said pirate captain landed on the ground with a bounce, before springing to his feet and looking up to examine the height he'd fallen. Well, that's one way to get out of that palace, he chuckled to himself cheerfully, before turning serious. Now where did that Gao Chao guy get to? I wasn't done with him. He said something about the closing ceremony. Luffy looked around, as though trying to work out where the closing ceremony might be, although the festive sounds nearby were making it pretty obvious. Luffy, Nami said, clearing her throat. Her captain wheeled around. You're here, Nami? Quote. Yes, she said, and we've got to get to the closing ceremony. Yosh. That puppet guy isn't gonna get away with this. Quote. Keep in mind to watch out for Quillam and Xiaomin as well, Nami said, they're two of his incarnations. Luffy nodded and they began running in the direction of the festive music. By the way, where did your guard robes go? Nami questioned him, eyeing his normal attire. Oh, they got in the way when I was trying to fight that right-hand guy, explained Luffy. I left them up in the room with the food. The afro is there too. Nami groaned, you were supposed to hold on to that for me. Do you have no idea how much the silk in that would have been worth? Quote. Nope. Luffy said with a laugh. You owe me for this. Nami snapped as she ran after him. Zoro's grip on his katanas tightened as he fought back Xiaomin. Despite the man's wiry appearance, he could pack enough of an attack for Zoro to not take him lightly, particularly when Quillam would halt his exchange with Sanji to become absorbed in Xiaomin for a moment, or vice versa. Zoro found it annoying. The other four accomplices had been defeated without much of an issue and were currently tied up by the Sunny. We have to join with the others, Chopper noted from the ship. We'll stay here, Zoro called over to him between strikes from Xiaomin. You take Sunny, get to the closing ceremony and help the others stop the assassination. All right, Chopper said with a nod. However, it seemed that the onslaught of opponents was not quite finished. A series of thumps announced the arrival of none other than the Kanga boat as it appeared from over the hilltops and began bounding fiercely toward them. The boat wants to fight us, Sanji noted, dodging a heavy strike from Quillam. Should I blast it away? Frankie questioned, readying his weapons left. No, I'll take care of it, Chopper said, jumping down from the ship and landing in Hornpoint. I might be able to talk to him. The rest of you should take Sunny and go and help Luffy and the others. Quote. Ichigo and Usopp continued to argue as they wound their way through the palace and toward the exit. At least I didn't handcuff us together, the sharpshooter pointed out. Ichigo rolled his eyes. Come on, not even you're that stupid. Usopp laughed nervously in response, of course not. Quote. Ichigo decided to think nothing of it. Any other great ideas? He questioned. Well, Usopp thought out loud as they continued running. Earlier on, I took a look at the gun those sea nymphs left. And? Quote. Well, there's a certain mechanism behind it. You see, there's a dial inside it. Ichigo nodded and briefly recalled the sniper telling him all about dials during one of his first mornings on the Thousand Sunny. It's a strange sort of dial, Usopp continued. I think it might be some sort of transportation dial. It has a partner that's underwater somewhere and is somehow able to transfer seawater to the dial in the gun, even if it's nowhere near water itself. This means that unless the partner dial is taken out of the water, the one in the gun will have an endless supply of water to shoot. Right, said Ichigo, and you can use this water dial gun to get these handcuffs off? Quote. I could, Usopp said. You could have used that sooner. Ichigo snapped. I left it on the ship though. What was the point of telling me, then? Quote. There they are, quote. Usopp and Ichigo skidded to a halt as a cluster of guards jogged their way. The exit. Ichigo noted, indicating to an open door to their right, which lead out into the closing ceremony grounds. They hurriedly exited the palace and found themselves swamped in the crowds of the closing ceremony. Get down, Ichigo. They'll see us. Usopp said, tugging the substitute Shinigami further into the crowd. It was easy to get lost in the sea of people. It was the biggest crowd either of them had seen yet. The vast majority of Shangpyo's citizens must have been there, creating an effective backdrop to hide against. Ichigo and Usopp wandered further into the crowd, when they ran into another pair whom seemed to be using the mass of people as a means for disguise. Usopp. Moon Guy. Luffy waved over to them. I wondered where you'd gotten to. You're the one who ran off in the first place, Usopp pointed out as the four of them joined in a small circle. So what's the situation? Ichigo asked. It's Gao Chao, Nami explained. He's been manipulating people this whole time. He was the reason the plague happened in the first place, and he uses the puppet fruit. Xiaomin and Quillam are part of him, and he plans to frame us for assassination. What? Ichigo and Usopp demanded. We have to stop him, Ichigo said. That's why we're here. Nami said. She was about to explain further, when she was silenced by the boom of the Den Den Mushi system as it roared to life. Welcome, a voice at the other end of the receiver bade the crowd, to the closing ceremony of Shangpyo's Festival of Three Eves. Quote. Evening was descending. And the closing ceremony was beginning. A large crowd of people, which must have consisted of virtually everyone on the island, had closed in on the closing ceremony grounds. The voice of the announcer continued to carry out to the gathered crowd as Nami side-glanced Ichigo. By the way, she said, eyeing the way his arms were restrained, why are you handcuffed, Ichigo? Quote. Ask Usopp, he said flatly. Why me? The sniper questioned. Ichigo and Usopp proceeded to squabble over the issue of the handcuffs, whilst Luffy simply laughed at them. Why am I not surprised you two got yourselves into that sort of trouble? Nami said, massaging her temples. Nami, tell your brother to stop being an idiot. Usopp ordered. How about I tell you both to stop being idiots? Nami suggested, bashing them over the head. Ouch, Ichigo commented, the problematic cuffs on his wrists rendering him unable to rub the place she'd struck. Ooh, it's starting. Luffy noted, as the Emperor made an appearance on the large stage-like ceremony stand. Seeing him in person, the emperor was surprisingly young, probably only a few years older than the four of them. He was dressed in rich robes of scarlet and sapphire, and carried himself with pride. As he stepped forth, an air of undisputed respect radiated from the audience. It was apparent that this man perhaps held more reverence than the highly esteemed Gao Chao. The assassination. Nami suddenly panicked, it could happen at any moment. But how do we know when? Ichigo questioned, looking around at the crowd for any possible hints. Luffy? Quote. The young pirate seemed to be staring vacantly out at the scene before him, paying no heed to the festive sounds and sights he normally would. After a moment, he spoke. A gunshot from an advantage point, he muttered so silently the other three almost didn't hear him. Then, without warning, their captain was in the air. A fraction of a second later, an explosive shot rang out throughout the closing ceremony grounds, and the skin below Luffy's chest was stretched as a bullet tried to pass through it. The bullet continued at almost the same speed it would have otherwise, before swiftly slowing down and being repelled off into the air. The unanticipated gunshot set the crowd into a scene of disarray, and palace guards, seemingly having forgotten Ichigo and Usopp, set about trying to keep order. He turned to face none other than Quillam, who approached him with an air of both confusion and frustration. Puppet guy. Luffy recalled him from the day before, you're part of him, aren't you? Quote. Quillam followed Luffy's gaze to the seemingly absent-minded advisor situated beside the Emperor, before turning back with a frown. I thought I'd disabled you. He hissed quietly. Luffy tilted his head to the side. Oh. Is that what you tried to do? Quote. Of course it's what I tried to do, you idiot. Quillam snapped in response. How else could I stop you from intervening? Quote. Put more food on the table, Luffy suggested. I finished it, so I came down here. That was a full feast. Quote. Anyway, Luffy continued, it's going to take more than that to take me out. Well then, Quillam smiled darkly, let's see about that. With his gaze focused fully on the puppet master, Luffy almost didn't notice the movement of the crowd around him, until a woman grabbed at his shirt. Huh? What are you doing? Quote. The civilians advanced on them like living puppets, their eyes unblinking and glazed over, with spider web-like threads manipulating the joints in their bodies. Creepy. Nami shrieked, batting a man away with her climb attack. You'll find that my puppet abilities are not limited to solely the incarnations of myself I create, Quillam said, but so long as there are living souls within reach, they can become my string puppets and succumb to my manipulation at a whim. To demonstrate his point, Quillam lifted his hands to display a series of strings which stranded out and captured the crowd around him. I can extend my range of power by simply doing this. A beam of light shot forth from his palm, mesmerizing even more of the crowd. Look away. Nami said, as she and the others shielded their eyes from the hypnosis. Are you curious? Quillam questioned once his beam-like strategy was finished. Allow me to demonstrate. He raised a single arm and spoke, his voice reaching all within the closing ceremony's grounds. The mighty Gao Chao. Quote. Nami looked around and noticed as every fist not belonging to her comrades was raised in turn. The mighty Gao Chao. The crowd rumbled. This is bad. What should we do, Luffy? Usopp questioned. He met no response. Luffy? Usopp looked over at his captain, only to see Luffy's brown eyes wide and glassy as his right arm was raised into the air by a fine thread. The mighty Chao Cow. The zombie like Luffy relayed. Now that's just ridiculous, Ichigo commented dryly. Oi! Snap out of it. Usopp said, whacking his friend over the head with Black Kabuto. At once, Luffy broke free of the mind control. That was weird, he said to himself. Look away when he does things like that. Nami snapped at him. But Nami, Luffy reasoned, he was shooting a beam. Quote. Nami rolled her eyes and muttered something under her breath, before turning back to face the ceremony stand. Gao Chao's gone. She noticed. He's up in that tower over there, Luffy said with a frown. How can you tell? Ichigo asked. I know these things, Luffy replied with a grin, placing a hand on his hat to shield his eyes. Ichigo was about to ask further, when the captain extended his arms up to the tower and proceeded to rocket himself up. Usopp and Nami focused on the crowd as they began to close in further. If we cut the threads, they return to their true selves, Usopp observed, firing a few pieces of shrapnel over the heads of the citizens. Ichigo watched as the two of them fought back the enclosing crowd, and looked up to the tower Luffy had rocketed himself into. I need to help. He closed his eyes, focusing fully on containing his Ryotsu to a single pressure point. Clenching his fists, he focused all tension to his restrained wrists, straining to force open the barrier that suppressed him. And then he found it. That one spark of Ryotsu-like energy he'd been searching for. In a fluid movement, he wrenched the cuffs binding his wrists apart, the metal snapping as though it were no more than a toothpick. He flexed his wrists, the remains of the cuffs clattering to the ground. He was back in business. The final threads of the puppified citizens were cut down just as the Sunny made its approach in the harbor. Frankie. Robin. Brook. Usopp waved over at the familiar ship and the three figures on it. The other three are bust taking care of parts of that Gao Chao guy back at the cove, Frankie relayed to them as he inspected Sunny's newest installation. Frankie, is now really the time to be toying with that Den Den Mushi system? Nami questioned apprehensively. Frankie grinned and gave her the thumbs up, you never know when it might come in handy. We've thought of a plan, Robin said. A few moments later, the poster of Gao Chao Ichigo had won at the shooting range the previous day was plastered strategically on the wall. Is that clear with everyone? Frankie questioned. The gathered straw hats and Ichigo gave a nod. I'll be off then, Ichigo said with a nod, leaping off the ship. You should give that to Luffy-san now, Brook noted to Usopp. Usopp nodded. He sighted Luffy, who stood in the partial debris of the upper tower, in which it seemed he and Gao Chao had begun to fight. Signaling his friend's attention, he proceeded to shoot up a small device, which Luffy easily caught. After a moment's pause, Luffy grinned and gave him a thumbs up, before running off to continue his exchange with Gao Chao. Hailong bounded into the square and towards the ceremony grounds. Well, what do you know? Chopper smiled, he was very easy to talk to. It's a ship, Sanji said flatly. And a kangaroo, Zoro added. I know that, you shitty Marimo, but fundamentally it's a ship. Quote. We're nearly there. Chopper interrupted their bickering as the closing ceremony grounds and port came into view, there's Sunny. Quote. Hailong slowed to a halt, allowing the three pirates to disembark, before bending to the ground and feasting on some top-quality grass whilst Zoro, Sanji and Chopper made for the ship. Robin Kwan. Sanji twirled when he sighted her up on deck. You're back, she noted. What happened with those two you were fighting? Brook asked. The two of him suddenly disappeared, Sanji explained, looking up toward the tower where Luffy and Gao Chao engaged in combat, probably to rejoin with the original body. Luffy dodged the swipe Gao Chao aimed at his head and shot forth a fist the advisor only narrowly escaped. It wasn't his opponent's strength that was an issue, but rather the speed. I don't think you realize what I've put into this, Straw Hat, Gao Chao said as they continued their exchange, planning the plague from the start, and then all those years of acting as an advisor, and now the final. Speak up, Luffy said. What? Gao Chao questioned. I can't hear you very well. Are you mocking me? He asked, enraged, or maybe you're just dense. Very well then. This was my plan from the start. I inflicted the plague on this island just so I could take heroic credit for ridding the island of it when a time came that suited me best. I took advantage and sheltered them from the knowledge of the age of pirates, luring any of said pirates, such as yourselves, away to take your bounties. And I'll give you this much credit. You lot have been the most difficult to properly capture so far. Not only was I able to have the Emperor successfully assassinated, but when I tried, rather than being able to frame you for it, you went in and rescued the guy. Is that good enough for you? Did you catch all of that? Quote. Luffy grinned. Yup, he said cheerfully, before reaching into his shirt and withdrawing a certain device, and I think they all did too. Quote. A look of sheer alarm crossed Gao Chow's face. Is that a Den Den Mushi? Quote. It's from my ship, Luffy replied. I've got a really good shipwright, you know. He knew how to connect this Den Den Mushi in our ship's new Den Den Mushi system with the ones that are being used for the closing ceremony. Already, the angry and confused shouts of the unpuppified civilians could be heard as they echoed up to the tower. All my years of work, Gao Chow fumed, you'll pay for this, Straw Hat. With a flash of light, Gao Chow's body divided into 3 forms. The 3 of you, hey? Luffy questioned, cracking his knuckles. He threw another punch, nearly making contact before Gao Chow seemingly disappeared altogether. He was then caught off guard by an attack from behind. Kanga Boat Osan? Luffy stammered, having narrowly avoided the knife swipe that had been aimed at his back. Indeed, the form of Xiaomin confirmed. The closer together we are, the stronger we are, Gao Chow said, now at his left. It's 3 against 1, Quillam added. Actually, Ichigo said, as he stepped through the window and into the tower, it's slightly more even than that. Moon Guy. Luffy beamed. Don't let your guard down, Straw Hat, Gao Chow cautioned, as a puppeteer, I have many tricks up my sleeve. Within an instant, a sleek dart shot forth from the puppeteer's clothing, catching Luffy by surprise. Quickly, he moved from its immediate path, the sharp tip nearly grazing his body, before catching on the fabric of his shirt and pinning him to the stone wall. Huh? Luffy looked down at the metal dart now restraining him by the shirt and stared at it blankly. That was a surprise. I couldn't see it coming with my haki. I told you to not let your guard down, Xiaomin said, and don't try to predict my moves. You may find that I can make myself immune to that kind of haki. Unfortunately, during the Emperor's meant-to-be assassination, I was careless. Quote. Without thinking, Luffy grabbed hold of the dart, wrenching it from his clothing. However, as soon as his skin came into contact with the metal, his insides lurched and he began feeling rapidly queasy, as though a force within the dart was sapping him of his energy. Quickly, he let go and let it clatter to the stone floor. Hey, are you okay? Ichigo asked, noticing Luffy's sudden decline in energy. Sea stone, Luffy muttered distastefully, regaining his stance and letting the lost energy rush back to him. How it works is a mystery, but it's dangerous for fruit users. What were you carrying that for then? Ichigo turned, questioning Gao Chow. It's dangerous for you as well. Never know when you might need it, the man responded with a shrug. I've had enough messing around with you, Luffy said. He took on a new formation, positioning his legs far apart and bending so that his fist met the cold stone floor. His heart began racing with the sensation of bottled-up energy, and the familiar feel of the heat pumping through his body as blood carried a wave of adrenaline. Gear second. Smoker watched the sequence of events unfold before his eyes. The majority of the crowd had undergone a puppet-like control earlier, courtesy of that had turned out to be that advisor guy's devil fruit ability. Himself and Tashigi had not fallen victim to the hypnosis themselves, but had had to give Charlie and Merlin a good whack in order to get the two idiots thinking straight again. As of now, he and his squad were attempting to keep order in the now restless crowd. Amongst his attempts, he glanced up at the tower Luffy and Gao Chow were in, only to see the orange-haired teen from before seemingly gliding through the air on his way up. That's Ichigo, Smoker realized. He's that Nami's brother they've been talking about. Gya. Smoker-san had been talking to Nami's brother like a friend. Charlie hollered. He'll be demoted. Added Merlin. Toshigi rolled her eyes. He's not going to be demoted, you dim wits. I wonder what fruit ability that is, Smoker observed, as Ichigo leapt into the tower, having run through the air as though an invisible path had been leading to his destination. That's not Geppo he's using. What should we do, Smoker-san? Charlie questioned him. For now, we watch, Smoker responded. Ichigo watched the blur of Luffy as the pirate captain attacked Gao Chao at the speed of a paced shunpo. What kind of technique is that? He wondered as he noted how Luffy's body seemed to simmer. That's amazing. His focus quickly transferred to the two other incarnations whom were advancing on him. Withdrawing the dark katana, he decided to make the first move. Activating his shunpo, he easily matched them in speed and mobility, yet could never quite manage to land a blow as he could have with Zangetsu. So it was time, he decided, for his new approach to such combat. Here goes nothing, thought Ichigo as he held the dark blade out before him. He reached deep within his mind, where he found a steadily fluctuating supply of Ryotsu. Thinking back to the simple Hado he'd witnessed Rukia and several other Shinigami perform several times before, Ichigo readied his stance and opened his mouth to utter the familiar words. Hado number 4. He said as he readied the blade for another strike, Byakurai. Quote. As he tore the katana down through the air, a surge of energy rippled outwards, channeling into an immense streak of pale blue lightning. What? Quillam stuttered, clearly not prepared as the lightning energy smote him where he stood, Xiaomin experiencing the same thing. Both bodies disappeared, having retreated to their master body. Ichigo stepped back, not letting his guard down. He watched as Luffy continued his speedy onslaught against the ever-quickening Gao Chao. The rubber boy skidded to a standstill, fists ready to strike. Gomu Gomu no, Ichigo noted Gao Chao brace for the attack, Jet Bazooka. Quote. Luffy bombarded the puppet master with what appeared to be a countless number of sizzling fists. However, Gao Chao managed to counteract, moving to dodge as many fists he could, which was only about half of them. Even so, the half that landed only seemed semi-effective. Strange, Ichigo thought to himself, observing the form of Gao Chao. He's suddenly gotten stronger. He's got to be about 3 times as strong as he was when we first began fighting. His features proceeded to contort into a scowl, more so than usual when a thought suddenly occurred to him. Wait, those other two? I've figured out your weakness, Ichigo said with a smile. This seemed to distract Gao Chao from his exchange with Luffy, bringing his attention to the substitute Shinigami. Huh? Quote. As a single being, your total strength is only ever at 1 level, right? Ichigo questioned. Gao Chao glared at him. That means that the more there are of you, the weaker each individual is. In a flash of light, the 3 forms dispersed once more. Just try to get us though, they said. Alright then, Ichigo said, before continuing to the final leg of the plan, Bakudo number 4, Hinawa. Quote. A crawling rope of light erupted from the katana's blade, momentarily blinding any onlookers with its lightning-like vividness. It rapidly tangled itself around a surprised Gao Chao, binding his arms to his sides and rendering him unable to move. Ichigo felt himself smirking as he brought the katana up and rested it over his shoulder, pleased that the Kido had worked. That was awesome! Luffy exclaimed in awe. Before Xiaomin or Quillam could make any sort of response, Sanji and Zoro arrived on the scene. Both incarnations were too distracted by the sudden predicament of their leader to notice their presence until it was too late, thus both were taken by surprise as when they were pinned down by a sword and tripped to the ground respectively. Don't let your guard down, Zoro quoted to them. And try not to underestimate us and just run off, Sanji added. Now you can't jerk around and switch with those other incarnations, can you? Ichigo asked. Time to finish you off, Luffy said, despite Gao Chao's protests. Gear 3rd. Ichigo's eyes widened in amazement as Luffy bit down on his thumb, and proceeded to seemingly inflate his hand to an increasingly enormous proportion. I don't care if you say bad things about me. I'm a pirate. It's not like the way outsiders see me is going to change any, he said, before looking up and observing Gao Chao through a set of menacing eyes, but if you threaten my nakama, you have another thing coming. Oh come on, Gao Chao reasoned frantically, his spazzing eyes ricocheting between Luffy, Sanji and Zoro, before suddenly landing in Ichigo. Fine then, forget the bounties of you and your crew. If you could just give me Kurosaki. But no mere words could hold Luffy back from what he'd come to do. Get your own moon guy. Quote. With a triumphant haul, Luffy's massive fist came crushing into the phony advisor, sending him flying. In turn, the two suppressed incarnations groaned and disappeared back into the form of their now defeated master. It was a victory. Now, that wasn't so hard once we could stop him from moving, Luffy said as the ground they stood on began crumbling. I think you may have overdone it though, Sanji admitted, eyeing the wreck of some of the tower's critical support beams, both of you. This tower's gonna collapse, Zoro noted as he re-sheathed his swords. Yosh, said Luffy, time to go. And with little effort, the four of them leapt, glided and rubber rocketed their way out of the crumbling tower into the safe ground below. Touching down on the ground, Ichigo turned to watch as the top of the tower they had recently been in took on a similar appearance to the top of a sand castle when not enough sand has been placed in the foundations to support it. Noting Luffy beside him, he gave a small smile. Hey, he reached out and ruffled at the unkempt hair of the smaller boy, nice work. Luffy grinned up at him. You too, Moon Guy. The uproar in the ceremony grounds was nearly deafening. The G5 had resigned themselves to trying to keep the crowds at bay, but it was for little to no effect. It took a direct address from the Emperor himself for the crowd to begin to collect themselves. Citizens, he said, his voice holding dignity and reassurance, calm yourselves. I had been growing suspicious of Gao Chao's actions over the past few weeks. I was first tipped off by the leader of a rebel group a few years back, and at first didn't believe a word of it. However, what he said stayed with me, and more often I'd start noticing suspicious elements about my advisor's actions. The Emperor's soothing voice seemed to calm the crowd somewhat, yet still there was an air of tight discomfort. But firstly, I need to thank the group, pirates, were they? For bringing an end to Gao Chao's plans and for saving me from the fate I was almost blind to. For that I am truly grateful. A murmur rose from the crowd as people exchanged words with one another. We can deal with all this mess later, the Emperor, maybe in a few months we can bring down the wall, and slowly come to terms with the outside world of today. I know that the information of the world beyond the island would be known by a few of Gao Chao's contestors. I urge you to not be afraid to come forward and make suggestions where you see fit. You will not be persecuted. After all, a new dynasty has come to Shangpao. One of change, of new beginnings. A time when Shangpao can open itself up to the world and prosper to its true potential. This is a time for celebration. Quote. Soul King. One of the crowd members cried, "Where's the Soul King?" Quote. One by one, other citizens began demanding the presence of the acclaimed musical skeleton. Ah, Brook noted, it seems as though my services are required. From seemingly out of nowhere, he grabbed his signature electric guitar and donned his kingly hat. He then leapt up onto the ceremony platform, sparking the delight of many a citizen, and lighting up the faces of those still fretting over the recent incident with Gao Chao. Even though they were shielded from the outside world, my music still found a way to reach them, the skeleton noted as he began strumming away at one of his most popular tunes, and now I can use it to help them welcome in this new era. As Brook continued to play, the music reached the ears of the people and they gradually began loosening up. It's a party. Luffy cried joyously as he burst forth from the rubble. Brook's pretty good, Ichigo admitted as he got to his feet beside the captain. The next half hour was spent enjoying Brooks' music, admiring the fireworks, going for joyrides on Hailong, and of course filling the stomach with a large variety of festive food. And the log has set, Nami announced with a smile as the crew finally congregated once again. Luffy grinned and looked on at the fireworks and partying. But maybe we should stay the rest of the night, he said, we can leave tomorrow morning. However, amongst all the celebrations, there was someone still on the job. Straw Hat. Smoker called from beside a food stall, don't go thinking that this victory has made you any less a wanted man. Quote. Gia. It's Smokey. Luffy realized, on second thought, let's leave now. Quote. Ichigo and the Straw Hats hurriedly loaded themselves onto the Thousand Sunny. With no need for preparations, the ship left the docks and rapidly began sailing from the port and out in the direction of the next island. What do we do about the wall? Asked Ichigo, pointing to the ominous pale barrier that lay before them. I could cut it down, Zoro suggested. Don't. The rubble will go everywhere. Nami snapped at him. I can handle this, Frankie said with a grin. He proceeded to pull a lever by the ship's steering wheel, triggering a sharp inhale of air in an area below the ship's deck. Coup de burst. Quote. Huh? What? Quote. Clearly not ready for the sudden acceleration of the ship through the air, Ichigo lost his footing and found himself tumbling through the air and forcing himself to skid to a halt. Crap, I forgot it could do that, he said, watching as the ship continued to glide on ahead. Oi, wait up, quote. After them, Smoker ordered his crew as the Thousand Sunny began to hurriedly sail out of Shangpao. Roger that. Charlie and Merlin saluted as they and the rest of the G5 crew hastily boarded their ship. In no time, the sails were unfurled, the anchor was lifted, and the marine battleship sailed at full speed after the ship of the infamous pirates. However, it seemed that the Straw Hats had been anticipating the G5's inevitable perusal. The squad of Marines looked on as the large pipe at the Sunny's rear began to vacuum a supply of air from the atmosphere around it, until it looked as though it were about to burst. And burst it did. Smoker watched as the ship became airborne and began hurtling through the sky, easily clearing the large wall that had helped dictate Shangpao's exclusion over the past many years. However, it seemed that the orange-haired teen had not been ready for the blast, and had gone flying off the ship, plunging towards the water below. And then the inevitable occurred, when the captain of the ship followed the demonstration, seemingly in effort to rescue his unlucky new crew member. As such, even after Ichigo regained his footing in the sky, an ability Smoker still couldn't quite fully comprehend, and began running through the air after the ship, Luffy plummeted into the ocean below. Smoker turned to Charlie and Merlin. And that, he said matter-of-factly, is why he is called Idiot 1. Ah, the two young Marines nodded, we see. Smoker squinted his eyes and observed the patterns the ripples cast over the water, only to suppress the urge to facepalm when Ichigo dove in after the idiot captain. So now they have another idiot, he thought to himself. They can't swim, he said out loud, we'll need someone to go and fish them out. Who volunteers? Quote. Smoker-san, Merlin said. What is it? Quote. Nami's brother mustn't be a fruit user. Smoker looked back over in time to see Ichigo pulling both himself and Luffy up out of the water, and quickly jumping through the air, over the wall and after the soaring ship. He narrowed his eyes in confusion. Just what is he? Quote. Zoro stepped back and made way as Ichigo and Luffy touched back down on deck. At once, the two began to argue over Luffy's hasty actions. Look Luffy, I know you mean well, but you can't just try to save me or anyone else when they fall into the water. You know you can't swim, idiot. It's the thought that counts, Luffy pouted. It's the fact that you can't swim that counts, Zoro contributed. You'd be more helpful if you just stayed put in those sorts of circumstances. As Luffy and Ichigo parted ways to respectively bother Sanji and bum around, Zoro turned to Robin, who seemed to have something to say. There was something I found unusual about Gao Chao, she said. Did it have something to do with the whole split up into different incarnations thing? Zoro questioned her. Partially, Robin replied. He said he could make up to 3 extra bodies, didn't he? Quote. Zoro nodded. That's right. That would mean that all up there could be more, yet we only ever saw 3. Not to mention the fact that after he was defeated, none of the incarnations could be found anywhere. It was as though they disappeared entirely off the island. What do you mean by that? Zoro questioned her. What I mean, Robin answered, is that I don't think Gao Chao or either of the other 2 incarnations were the original body. Shearwater hefted a sigh as slowly, but surely Potoro lost hand of his supposedly great scheme. He frowned as the other man came to report the recent exploits. So, Shearwater raised a dark eyebrow at his second in command. It didn't work out? Quote. Potoro inclined his head. Indeed, Master Shearwater. It seems my puppet abilities failed us this time around. Pity, Shearwater commented. I'd heard one of your incarnations had been something of a well-respected man over there for some time. Well, we have that Straw Hat Luffy to thank for that no longer being true. Besides, those incarnations are hard to control over such a long distance. If you say so, Shearwater responded. At any rate, Potoro continued, whether I was successful or not, those Straw Hats are still bringing Kurosaki Ichigo closer to the glade of the ocean's icy breath, closer to Adlibin. In that case, I should hope that any future attempts to stall them further in their journey are as unsuccessful as yours, Shearwater said. Potoro stalled his response. Besides, Shearwater said with a grin, the next glade may not be so kind to them. Chapter 13, A Matter of Pints. Khan lay on his back and glared up at the obnoxiously blue sky. How he'd come to hate that color. He closed his eyes in frustration as the uncomfortable timber beneath his back rocked tirelessly back and forth upon the ocean's mild swell. Casting a side glance at his accomplice, he decided to start some form of conversation. Hey, electric freak, he called over. Grimjow glanced over at him. What is it, Ichigo wannabe? Quote. You have powers, right? Quote. Yeah, what of it? Quote. Can you change the color of the sky? Quote. What the? Why would I be able to do that? Grimjow demanded. Then can you at least dye your hair? Quote. Before Khan could react, he felt himself effortlessly hefted up by the scruff of the neck and deposited overboard. With a splash, he landed in the salty water. He came up spluttering. What was that for? Quote. Being a damn moron, that's what, Grimjow responded. I thought you could do with a bit of seawater to cool you off. I'm not sure how much good it'll do in fixing your brain, but hey, not all broken things can be fixed. Khan muttered a string of curses at the Arankar as he inelegantly scrambled back on board. I'd much rather be with Rukia One-san, or Orihime, or any pretty lady right now, Khan grumbled, before purposely shaking his head with vigor, sending water droplets flying over to Grimjow. I'd much rather be with the real Ichigo, Grimjow commented flatly, raising a hand to partially shield himself from Khan's watery vengeance. At least he's not so freaking annoying. Khan sat still for a few moments, before both his and Grimjow's stomachs rumbled simultaneously. Wait, Khan said with a raised eyebrow, how does your stomach rumble? Quote. I don't know, Grimjow answered. They continued bobbing along aimlessly for a few moments, before Grimjow squinted his eyes out to what lay before them. As that is island? Quote. Sure enough, as they drew closer, a landform slowly approached from the distance, several buildings lined up on its shores. It is. Khan confirmed, and the two began to paddle. Paddle faster. I'm starving. Quote. Ichigo was feeling pretty damn good about himself. And why? He'd accomplished something he'd never thought he would. Rather, he'd accomplished something he'd never thought he'd need to, something he'd never thought would be relevant to him. But with Zangetsu out of his reach, he'd had to tap into other means of Shinigami combat. Namely Kido. Who'd have thought I'd be relying on Kido? Ichigo questioned, admiring the dark katana he'd borrowed from Zoro, feeling the wind stream through his wet hair, slowly drying it as the ship continued to soar through the sky. He grinned to himself. I wonder what Rukia and the others would think. I'm probably better than Renji already, because my Kido no longer blows up. You seem pretty happy, Nami noted. It didn't blow up, Ichigo repeated to himself over and over. I attempted some Kido and they didn't blow up. I told you it would be best to start from the lower numbers, Nami said with a smile, and then you can work your way up. Not that I know much about it, but I assume that's the way it works, from what you told us earlier. The two I tried were both number 4s, Ichigo explained, before proceeding to reposition the katana outwards, toward the ocean. Let's see if I can do something a bit higher, Hado number 33. Sokatsui. Quote. Once again, a ball of electric blue shot forth from the blade, only to again implode on itself. You're really wanting to do that number 33, aren't you? Nami questioned flatly as Ichigo smoldered. Yeah, he answered, but maybe going straight to 33 from 4 is too big a jump. You think? Quote. The moment the tiny rowboat docked in port, the Arankar and the Mod Soul rocketed out of the vessel, onto dry land, and chaotically ran into town. It was a marvelous sensation, no longer being confined to the small floating wooden structure with nothing but each other's company. The town itself was a descent-sized settlement, complete with towering brick buildings and curving, paved streets. But first thing came first and they were hungry. It wasn't long before they located a homely-looking inn and decided to make it their base. Pushing open the warm oak doors, they entered the inn's foyer, a cozy place with a warm fireplace built into the stone wall. Behind the desk sat a middle-aged woman with a thick turret of red hair which seemed to defy gravity. May I help you? She questioned. Food, Grimjow said, we're hungry. Anything else? The woman asked. Yeah, a room for 2 as well. Make sure it's one with 2 single beds and not just a double bed. Right, the woman said, scrawling the details onto a piece of paper. Oi, Khan hissed across to the Arankar, whose money are we using? Quote. Grimjow shrugged. We can worry about that later. Your room is just this way, if you'll follow me, the woman said, before leading them up a flight of old stairs. The stairs creaked under their footing and steeply ascended them to the inn's upper floor. About a dozen or so doors lined the hallway, each holding a different room. I think you'll find that this one suits your needs, the woman said, twisting a key into the lock of one of the final doors, having it swing open with a click. The room was small and slightly musty, with 2 single beds positioned at either end. Aside from that, there was an old dresser by the window and a chair in the corner. Much better than that damned boat, Grimjow commented with a nod as he and Khan walked in. It's nice, but I'm hungry, Khan complained. The small 4-framed window showed them night was swiftly approaching, and the dull thrum of music and voices from downstairs told them the bar downstairs was beginning to get rowdy with the dinner crowds. If you'd like to move down into the bar, I'm sure a meal can be fixed for you, the woman said to them kindly. And without unpacking, not that there was anything to unpack, the two hungrily headed back downstairs and out into the bar. As they entered, a flamboyantly colored rainbow poster caught Grimjow's eye. Let's make sure we're out of here by Thursday night, he said, indicating the poster to Khan. Khan gulped and nodded in agreement. They sat at a small table, where they ordered a set of meals which were bought out for them quite quickly by a young barmaid. Are you free later tonight, miss? Khan questioned her with a twinkle in his eye as she set down a plate of steamed beef. Grimjow flicked him in the side of the head. Oi, quit being an idiot. Khan grumbled and began eating his food, shoveling it down by the mouthful. Grimjow followed suit, but it wasn't long before they noticed a disturbance in the atmosphere. The bar had suddenly gone deathly silent. Khan wheeled around in his seat to see a small group of men standing in the bar's entrance. From what he could gather, these men were pirates. He could tell by the way they dressed and stood, as well as the air of intimidation which seemed to accompany them. Their overall appearance immediately made Khan think of the get-up of some of the heavy metal bands he'd seen while channel surfing on the TV at Ichigo's home. Who are these guys? Grimjow glared at the new arrivals as he continued picking at his dinner. The man whom appeared to be their leader stepped forward and glanced around the room, his small dark red eyes taking in his surroundings, briefly skimming over Khan and Grimjow, before focusing ahead, on the bar. A couple of scars lined his face, surrounding his left eye, and a pair of dark goggles were positioned atop his turret of bright red hair. The overall structure of the man was quite impressive. He was heavily muscular and would easily have stood a head taller than Grimjow. His choice of clothing only enhanced his intimidating appearance further, a large, red fur-trimmed coat dominating his torso and almost sweeping the floor. At his side stood another tall muscular man, whom wore a blue and white full head helmet ridden with holes atop a wild mane of blonde hair. The helmet obscured all of his face, save for a small blonde goatee which emerged from beneath the mask. The leader opened his dark lips and spoke, addressing his crew. As soon as he heard the man's voice, Grimjow decided he didn't like him. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but there was something about his voice that put him off. It's the kid pirates. Grimjow could hear people muttering to each other with mixes of fear and anxiety. Relax, civilians, the leader, whom Grimjow guessed to be Kid said, hands raised. Believe it or not, even monsters like us get hungry. We would do our own cooking, but someone had to go and incinerate the stove. Kid gave a begrudging side glance to a zombie-esque crew member with long tattery white hair, who smiled guiltily. Besides, he continued, I've heard this place has good booze. That's all the reason we need for tonight. Grimjow frowned and marked the captain and crew furiously as they took a table not far across from them and began ordering their various meals and drinks. What kind of a man orders pasta? Grimjow questioned as he watched two large platefuls of the food be delivered to the table a few moments later. Does it really matter? Khan questioned. Grimjow growled and returned his focus to his own food, eating angrily and with increasing vigor. A moment later, a large jug of some sort of alcoholic beverage was brought out and placed in front of Kid. If he thinks he can take on one of them, then I can as well, Grimjow said, before calling out to the barmaid. Hey! One of those over here as well. I'll take two more, Kid called over to her, his sharp gaze clashing competitively with Grimjow's. Then I'll take 3. Quote. 4. Quote. Several minutes later, after a flustered barmaid had retreated to the sanctuary of the inn's kitchen and emerged with ample jugs of hard liquor, Kid and Grimjow eyed each other from their opposing tables and each took a swig of the closest pint. Khan looked on blankly and the masked man beside Kid continued slurping away, the long noodles sliding snugly through the many holes dotting his mask, and likely also observing the exchange between Grimjow and his captain. Khan then eyed the several pints in front of them, and with a shrug, reached the nearest one and began chugging it. Grimjow raised an eyebrow as he watched Ichigo's body take a swig of the beer. Isn't Ichigo underage? He questioned. Maybe, Khan said, admiring the contents of the jug as he swirled them indifferently, but I'm not. What's it matter to you anyway? Quote. The Arankar shrugged apathetically and returned to chugging his own pint of grog. As the hours went past, the number of empty jugs began to dominate the number of full ones. But Grimjow and Kid still weren't done. I'll have 5 more jugs of this stuff. 6. Quote. 7. 10. Quote. Khan paled and looked back over to Kid's crew. He frowned in contemplation, swashing the contents of the pint. His thoughts were growing fuzzy, but he wasn't about to stop listening to them. You know, those Kid guys look like real friendly people, he decided. I'm gonna go and talk to one. Having made up his buzzing mind, Khan stood and weaved his way over to the other table, sliding into place beside the masked blonde man. Killer gazed through the holes that decorated his mask and observed the young man now seated opposite him. He shrugged and re-slot the straw he had been drinking with through one of said holes, appreciating the sensation of the alcohol burning down his throat. He glanced back at his captain, who continued to argue with the blue-haired guy who was mysteriously alive despite a sizable hole through his gut. "Hi." The teen across from him regained his attention. "Hello," Killer responded. "Was ya name?" Quote. Killer. There was silence, save for his captain yelling something along the lines of "puny cat" at the blue-haired guy, followed by the response of "stupid pasta lover." It seemed though, that his new friend had gone off on a tangent. "I don't even know why Urahara sent me here in the first place, you know?" The teen slurred at him. "I mean, the entire point of me being around is to fill in for Ichigo when he's away, right?" But of course, Killer chose to go along with whatever the intoxicated young man was nattering on about, and what do you think you'll do about that? Quote. Grimjow countered Kid's latest insult but ordering 4 more jugs of the beverage. The barmaid disappeared back into the kitchen, muttering about hoping they had enough left. He turned to his left expecting to see Khan, but was instead greeted by an empty seat. Where did he get to? It seemed that in all his verbal feuding with the pirate, he hadn't noticed his own accomplice wander over to their table and begin pouring out his life issues to the crew. "Oi, you!" Grimjow shouted. Khan looked over. "What are you doing over there?" Quote. Khan shrugged. "Something. How many drinks have you had?" Quote. Khan used his fingers to count. 2 or 3, I think. "What a pathetic tolerance," Grimjow remarked. "Now get your ass up to bed before you do something even stupider than usual." Khan pouted, but decided to do what the Arankar said. He was getting pretty tired after all. After Khan was gone, Kid seized the Arankar up and down, eyes lingering on the unusual feature of the hole through his gut, a trait people didn't normally have. "Did we fire a cannon at you once?" the captain questioned. "But that would kill him," the man with tattered white hair said. "I know that, moron." He took another swig of his current jug. "I was just asking." Grimjow grinned. "I could keep this up all night." In the early hours of the morning, Khan awoke. He needed to take a leak. As he turned over, a dull thrumming pounded, and he wasn't quite sure if it came from downstairs or was just in his head. It was pretty obvious Ichigo had never had any alcohol before, and now he was paying for it. Groaning and stretching up from his bed, he glanced across the room to see he was alone. "Wonder where that bastard's gotten to," he thought to himself as he stood and exited the room. Wandering up the hallway he found, to his distaste, the upstairs bathroom was already in use. Sighing in defeat, he opted to use the downstairs one. He wandered along the corridor once again and down the stairs. He paid no heed to the going-ons in the bar as he crossed the room and entered the men's bathroom. Walking across the tiled floor, he reached the special men's wall. He unzipped the pants he was wearing and commenced his bladder relief with an accomplished sigh. His eyes opened at the sound of the timber door creaking open behind him and he glanced over his shoulder to see Killer enter the room. Khan remained silent as the masked man crossed the room and took residence in the slot beside him. A loud clatter of metal sounded from just outside. It was clear that Kid and his crew were still out in the bar. It only made Khan's head pound more. "Damn it. I'm still a bit drunk." Noting Killer still beside him, he opted to try and make the situation a little less uncomfortable. "Hi," he said awkwardly. The masked man glanced over at him and inclined his head in greeting. "Your blue-haired friend is still exchanging with the captain," he said matter-of-factly. "He's not my friend," Khan snapped. "Oh. I'm sorry." There was a pause before Khan realized what Killer's statement actually meant. "Wait, you mean they're still trying to outdrink each other?" Quote. Exactly. I don't think either are intoxicated yet either. Though I think they've started throwing things at each other. A large crash followed by a shout confirmed Killer's thoughts, and Khan quickly finished up his business and exited the bathroom, Killer not far behind. They entered the bar, only to see it a mess with a variety of miscellaneous items that had been hauled tirelessly around the room. Ah, there's the electric blue freak, Khan noted blearily. His eyes widened when he noted a vast multitude of metal products in the room receding toward the red-haired captain, who proceeded to haul them toward Grimjow. And then, Khan remembered. The Kid Pirates, I read about these guys in the paper the other day. He watched as Kid manipulated the metal to his will. He's one of those fruit users. Look here, asshat, Grimjow began. I don't know who you are, but you really piss me off. Kid opened his mouth to reply, when one of his crew members burst into the room. What is it, Wire? Asked Kid, agitatedly dropping the array of metal. There's some Marines coming, the man replied. Marines? Kid questioned, who cares? Let them come. Rear Admirals Metsumeri and Daigen are with them, Wire reported. Kid sighed and cursed, looking around at the destruction they'd caused. Fine, let's get going, he said begrudgingly, before turning back to Grimjow. Maybe we can finish this another time. At their captain's word, the crew peeled themselves from the floor and their seats and exited the bar. Khan observed their departure with mild interest, before turning and gazing out the window. The view of the rugged mountain landscape nearby was slowly creeping into view as dawn came, though the sun was yet to rise. Grimjow muttered something and stood, departing to, Khan guessed, the bathroom. Deciding he may as well stay up, Khan stood and exited the bar, out into the foyer and the street beyond it. It was very quiet at this hour, though Khan wasn't really surprised. He watched as a small platoon of Marines marched somewhere in the distance, among them who he assumed were the Vice Admiral's kid had been hesitant about opposing. Must be pretty powerful, he noted offhandedly to himself as he sat by the gutter. A few minutes later, he noticed a small portion of the officers coming his way. They were chatting quietly amongst themselves, likely about monetary subjects, or complaining about such an early morning. As they came closer still, Khan decided he'd do the friendly thing and greet them. Hello, he spoke once the Marines were close enough to be in earshot. The Marines, whom had likely come by for an early breakfast, simply ceased their walking and chatter immediately to stare at him as though he'd come from another planet. Which probably wasn't that far from the truth. Okay, Khan thought, slowly lowering the hand he'd raised to wave at them. Is this how they normally respond when someone waves at them? They're starting to creep me out. Finally, after what seemed like an age, one of the Marines found his voice. It's him. The Marine shouted, pointing a menacing finger at Khan. Yes, Khan nodded, confused, it's me. Seize him and bring him to the Rear Admirals. The Marine ordered. Huh? Khan blinked dumbly as the set of Marines advanced on him. Before they could reach them, he stood and put the mod soul strength in his legs to action by springing up onto a nearby shop roof, a feat the actual Ichigo wouldn't have been able to accomplish in a terminal body. Hey, what's the problem? He snapped from the rooftop, I haven't done anything. Nonsense. One of the other officers called up at him, now tell us, fiend, where are the rest of the Straw Hat crew? Quote. Khan tilted his head to the side, Straw Hat crew. Am I supposed to know who that is? Quote. Though when he thought about it and said the name out loud, he couldn't help but think he'd read it somewhere earlier as well. Well yeah, one of the other Marines replied, after all, aren't you and your sister with them? Quote. Look, I think you've got the wrong guy, Khan said. I think I'd know if I had a sister or was with a pirate crew. If you're interested in pirates though, you just missed Kid and his crew. He's trying to steer our attention away from him so he can escape, another Marine noted. However, before anything more could be done, a sudden interruption halted their advances. The officers barely managed to dodge as a blade narrowly avoided slicing them through. "Next time I won't miss," Grimjow said, stepping forward. "Is this your accomplice?" One of the Marines demanded up at Khan. "Do you always sprout bold accusations at the first idiot you come across each day, or is this idiot a special case?" The former Espada questioned, resheathing his blade as he stepped forward. The Marines instinctively took a step back and brandished their weapons. "Who are you?" one questioned, eyeing Grimjow's hair and hollow hole. "None of your business," Grimjow shot back, and Khan jumped down from the building. "After them," the Marine ordered, and the lot of them began advancing at once. "Let's get out of here," Khan said. "I'd prefer to stay somewhere we can relax a bit." Grimjow grunted in agreement, and the two shot off towards the harbor. "Oi, electric freak," Khan called across to his accomplice. "Did you do something to tick these guys off?" Quote. The former Espada shook his head. "Why are you asking me that? You're the one they're after." "But I haven't done anything," Khan answered as they continued to run, "unless..." "Unless?" Quote. "Ichigo has done something." Grimjow glanced across to the man he'd labeled Ichigo wannabe, and frowned in realization. "You both look exactly like each other, you could be the same person." "Which means..." The pair instantly jumped to the same conclusion. Ichigo must have done something stupid. Damn it. This is all his fault. Quote. They may have had little in common and a mutual dislike for one another. But right now, none of that mattered. All that mattered was that they had been quite unceremoniously shoved into a wacky world by a flamboyant shopkeeper in pursuit of that troublesome teenaged substitute Shinigami whom they were now both cursing. It was at this moment, whilst being chased into the glorious sunrise by a herd of Marines, that the Irankar and the Mod Soul shared their first moment of unspoken understanding.
Unfortunately, this part is over. I hope you enjoyed it. Please have a good morning, afternoon, evening or night. See ya next time.